from the conference-wide view, I mentioned at the top 6 Big Ten teams, 5 SEC teams, all 5 of them up there in the top 16. Do you see that? Do you have any conference-wide takeaways in terms? And obviously, literally, all of this is perception. This is 100% just what college football experts at CBS Sports and 24/7 Sports think, how they're stacking these teams against each other. Is the SEC top heavy? Are there teams that should be in that aren't? And is the Big Ten being anchored like the Penn State and the Michigan inclusion is like talent and brand, where you're like, I think last year was not representative of where that program is right now, of how good the coaching is and of how good the talent is. And so I'm willing to watch that away. I think interestingly enough, like Iowa's kind of on the other side. They won 6 straight games to finish the year. And while they might have some questions, including losing a lot on the defensive line and having a quarterback that we still aren't quite settled on how much of a difference maker he can be, you're looking at Iowa and you're like, oh, no. Like we saw how they finished the year last year. You got to include them. So the Big Ten's 6 selections leading all conferences is interesting because it has both of those angles to it, where there's these teams that seem to be, we're ignoring what happened last year. Maybe, I guess you could throw Wisconsin in there too, for Wisconsin, Penn State, and Michigan. Then there's like an Iowa and an Indiana where we are absolutely hanging on to what we saw last year. And it's led to them being the most represented conference in these rankings.
Well, I can only speak for my rankings. I did. When it came to Penn State and Michigan, my idea was I didn't want to put too much into 2020 because 2020 was just a weird year for the Big Ten in general. So, yeah, for Indiana, definitely last year played a huge role because I think that there's, I hate to, but there's momentum with that program going forward. And then for Iowa, I mean, they did win. They were hot to finish last season, but me including Iowa in my top 25 isn't about 2020. It's just about what Iowa is at this point. It's a top 25 program. It's going to end up in there somewhere. Maybe it finishes just outside in a bad year, but it's always hovering around the top 25. So that's why I had that in mind. I think we could say the same thing as far as ignoring 2020 for, again, LSU to be up as high as it is. That's ignoring 2020.
Guys, I think that really between about 17 and 45, there's really very little difference. And the number 25 is just an arbitrary cutoff, right? It used to represent about the top 25% of college football back when we only had about 100 teams in D1. Now we have 130 teams in D1. So if you want to look at the top, 25% now, you got to really kind of expand it out to like the top 40 or so programs. I'd say one team that I had in mind was NC State. I think NC State's a better team than Indiana. I think they're a better team than a lot of these teams that were listed. I don't really buy into I think I would take them over Oklahoma State. So for me, yes, the SEC is tops because they have a lot more teams that I feel like are safely inside that top 15 range than the Big Ten does. The Big Ten has a lot more of those sort of fringe top 25 teams, I think, particularly in the East with Penn State, Michigan, and Indiana. So I'm like
one loss and you're bounced. When you're in those spots, you're in the danger zone from a rankings perspective, where one loss and you're probably not going to be in next week.
Yeah. Also, I have TCU over Oklahoma State in the Big 12.
I
don't get the Oklahoma State love. Do you guys have Oklahoma State high? If so, sell me on that if you would.
We turned in 30 to get this top 25. I had TCU at 26. I did not have Oklahoma State. I had NC State at 28, which wouldn't have made the top 25, but I did not have Oklahoma State at all.
I did not have either in my top 30.
Neither TCU nor NC State?
Nope.
Boy, you're missing out on some good hype trains.
I had NC State at 30 though.
I was on the Pack Prod podcast this week. Boy, they are excited about competitive depth. We're finally feeling like we got some competitive depth at NC State. It's gonna be a big year. I mean, they draw. Oh, and to your point, Danny, I do not think about it from the perspective of what's it going to be. When I'm ranking, I'm going like power rating style. Like if I was to like, who do I think is better? Who would I like? I always lean on actual power ratings if I'm talking about like setting a mythical betting line, but it's like, who would I pick? You could set a line, but who would I pick among these teams to play on a neutral field? That's how I would do it, because NC State, while their team is, I'm with you, bud, they also have a really tough, they draw North Carolina and Miami from the Coastal. And then, of course, you've got Clemson. So when you're looking at like taking the next step, he's like, all right, well, because you're in Clemson's division, say an ACC championship, that's really tough. So what's realistic? And then the fans start talking about, all right, well, 10 wins. 10 wins would be like a really big time achievement. It's like, cool. Well, you've got North Carolina, Miami, and Clemson on that schedule. So you're going to have to beat one of those to get to 10 wins and not have one of those losses along the way, like at Wake Forest, at Boston College, something like House of Horrors right there. But I don't take any of that schedule stuff into consideration when I do these rankings.
I mean, a top 25 team with NC State's schedule goes 8-4, 9-3.
Right. Yes.
A top 25 quality team against that type of schedule goes about 8-4, 9-3. Mm-hmm. I think that's capable. I think that's very much within their range.
For the Pac-12, the Oregon up there at number 8, then no Pac-12 teams until you get to USC at number 14. There is a little bit, as I've been obviously shout out to Bill Connolly, friend and guest of the program, all of his information, including preseason SP plus and the returning production rankings, were data that I used as I was doing all my research and ranking these teams. There's an interesting position with the Pac-12 where it seems like there's Oregon at the top, and then you've got this big group where it's going to be really competitive, I think. But how do we decipher like what's being good and what's beating up on each other? Because I've thought the Big 12 was really good before, and then Big 12 gets into bowl season and they get blown out, or in non-conference they don't play well, or in the NFL draft they don't have a whole lot of players drafted. And I come back to this podcast and I say I need to stop mistaking competitiveness for competency. I need to stop saying because these are really fun, good games from an entertainment standpoint does not mean these are good football teams, because we cannot seem to separate a lot of these Pac-12 teams. Does that mean that the Pac-12 is going to be a good conference this season, or are we going to get potentially fooled by all these teams beating up on each other?
What teams do you think have a shot to end up in the top 25? For me, obviously, Oregon, USC, I believe UCLA, Arizona State, and Utah, and Washington. Although Washington, I'm a little bit more down on. I was driving the Washington hype train, but now they lost their best defensive lineman to, I believe it blew out his Achilles at the end of spring practice. So that really sucks because they already lost some impact defensive linemen off that team to graduation in the draft.
But you just mentioned we just talked about half the conference, 2 teams from the North and 4 teams from the South.
Sure. But Chip, I mean, we just got done talking about like, what's the difference between like number 17 and number 45? It's minimal. Like, I think that there are 3 or 4 teams that have a chance to finish sort of in that 17 to 25 range. There's not much difference between those teams. It's just not quality-wise.
I think that the ceiling for some of those teams seems higher because they're not banging their head against an Alabama and Ohio State or a Clemson or an Oklahoma. Right? We see it seems like an open door, because if Arizona State gets everything rolling, if Jayden Daniels is one of the best players in the country, Arizona State wins the Pac-12, right? I mean, you just can quickly start connecting dots, and that is a higher ceiling in terms of accomplishments than anything that you could say about a mid-tier team in the SEC. Like, if you want to say Ole Miss probably deserves consideration for one of these spots, I would hear it. But Ole Miss and Arizona State are not going to be able to accomplish the same things because Arizona State has a pathway to something for the trophy case.
So those teams have top 25 ceilings, not top 15 ceilings.
Chip, would you rather, for national title, would you rather have Arizona State at 100-1 or Ole Miss at 150-1?
Arizona State.
I'd rather have Ole Miss at 150.
I'd rather just save my money.
I'm not betting
those
either.
Teams are not winning it. I mean,
these are
if you gave me like
future
500-1, I would take a shot on it probably, but like 150-1 and 100-1 are bad values. Like, just if you run the numbers on those, those are like, the books are just absolutely taking you behind the woodshed, dude.
They're just there for fans to bet on.
You're taking a huge haircut on those odds. You're giving up so much value. Don't bet those. Sorry to our partner William Hill, but that's
so much good advice from Bud Elliott here, telling you how to get behind the numbers, being smart.
Here's something that, I mean, we're getting off topic now, but this is somewhat surprising to me. These teams are all 500 to 1 to win the national title. They're South Carolina, Louisville, and Illinois. They're all the same. So in the book's mind, South Carolina and Louisville are the same as Illinois.
And in my mind, I agree. As far as the ability to win the national title, they're exactly the same.
But
Zero.
Cal is 750 to 1. And that kind of goes against what you're saying, Chip, was like the path would be easier in the Pac-12. So I don't know.